Tonight, the league's leading population fell to 17. Not for long. Another play-in game would cut it again before the night's over. But for a few hours, Charlotte's death changes the census. The Hornets enter Friday as the East's 9 seed, 44-38. Fresh, fresh off that 127-126 overtime escape against Miami. And they walked into Orlando with one more breath left. The Magic, 45-37, were waiting in the East 8 seed game, with Detroit sitting on the other side of the bracket for the winner. This isn't a vague late April basketball. This is a one-night survival hearing. And Charlotte didn't fail this hearing slowly. It failed immediately. By the end of the first quarter, the Hornets were down 38-16. And by halftime, they were down 68-37. And that's the kind of score that removes suspense and replaces it with documentation. So let's get to our ruling. Official cause of death, flat tire. Not an explosion, not a heart attack, not execution, a flat tire. This team had built real momentum, real hope, and real late season credibility, and then suddenly had zero traction when the road got steep. This was a vehicle that had made it all the way to the elimination checkpoint and then simply started riding on the rim. And that's what makes this one a little bit cruel. Charlotte didn't crawl into the playoff by accident. This wasn't some 36-win fraud, hoping the calendar might save it. The Hornets had gone 34-15 since January 3rd. And the Miami game had the look of a team arriving ahead of schedule, with pulse, personality, just enough chaos to become dangerous. They won that first play-in game in overtime. LaMelo Ball scored 30, handing out 10 assists. He hit the game-winning layup with 4.7 seconds left. For one night, the whole thing looked alive in a way that mattered. But that was your false hope. Charlotte didn't die as a doormat. They died convincing people it might actually be something. That's why this autopsy works. There's a real organism here, a young team, surging team, a team that had finally reached the part of the season where the games feel like they belong to the adults. Then Orlando met them at the door and turned the first half into pesticide. So what are your symptoms? The first symptom was immediate structural collapse. No traction, no organized response, no ability to absorb Orlando's first blow without falling apart. Down 22 after one quarter and down 31 at halftime. That's not just we missed some shots. That's a system-wide failure in an elimination setting. That's a team whose emergency lights came on before the bridge. The second symptom was a sputtering lead guard, and this is where LaMelo Ball belongs in the report, not as the sole villain against Miami. Ball was brilliant in the broad sense, 30 points, 10 assists, the late winner, but he was also 2 for 16 from 3. That was survivable once because the game got weird enough for Charlotte to escape. It wasn't something you want to carry into the next do-or-die game. The cold spell didn't look like noise anymore. It looks like a warning light. That mattered because bad playoff offense is not one giant mistake. It's accumulated drag, a forced pull-up here, a rushed 3 there, a possession that starts with urgency and ends with a bailout. When your lead creator is already running on fumes from a distance, and the next game turns with a 38-16 open quarter, the cold shooting stops being trivia and starts becoming part of the body report. The third symptom was the setting itself. Charlotte had just survived a 53-minute overtime knife fight against Miami. Orlando, meanwhile, had lost its first play-in game to Philadelphia, 109-97, and got dropped into a second-chance home game for the 8 seed. So one team arrived carrying the emotional and physical residue of a thriller. The other arrived embarrassed at its own house, with its season cornered and its crowd ready to help beat the life out of somebody. It's not the whole explanation, but it's part of the toxicology. And if you're asking whether this should be framed as murder, I still think no. It looked like murder. By halftime, it really looked like murder, but the official ruling should stay colder than that. Murder puts too much emphasis on Orlando's violence. Flat tire puts the emphasis where it belongs, on Charlotte's loss of forward motion. The Magic didn't need to invent this death. They mostly had to notice it and keep on driving. Now, to be fair to the corpse, the Hornets didn't come into this night empty. Charlotte had built something real this season. That 34-15 run since January 3, not imaginary. Ball had taken on more responsibility. Brandon Miller had become one of the shape of the future players in the conference. Kobe White had given them instant offense and real lift after the trade. They weren't fake alive. That matters. You want your dead teams to have been alive first. Otherwise, there's no tragedy, only bookkeeping. But there's a difference between being alive and being roadworthy in the playoffs. This game exposed that difference in brutal, fluorescent light. Charlotte had enough juice to survive one wild, emotional, desperate night at home. Didn't have enough composure, shooting stability, or defensive footing to survive the second night on the road when the opponent hit first, then never stopped. So the time of death, you can call it the first quarter if you want to be severe. I wouldn't fight you, but 38-16 is enough to begin writing the certificate. The cleaner answer, though, is halftime. 68-37, that's where the game stopped pretending to be a contest and became a document. The body was still twitching after that, but the death was already complete. So what survives? The idea, the rise survives. The fact that Charlotte played meaningful April basketball survives. The fact that this franchise finally looked like it had escaped its own swamp, that survives. You don't throw away a season because it ended under a bright white sheet. You just write down what killed it. And what killed it was not one dirty play against Bam Adebayo. It wasn't karmic revenge, not some cosmic punishment dressed up as basketball theology. That would show too much fan color. And this series, not about fan color. This is a coroner's table. The cleaner read is simpler and harsher. Charlotte had a live battery, then lost traction at the worst possible intersection. Final ruling, cause of death, flat tire. Time of death, halftime. Symptoms, immediate. Structural collapse, no early counterpunch, and elite guard whose long ball rhythm never fully recovered from the first play-in game. False hope, the Miami escape, the 34-15, the 34 win, 15 loss surge since January 3rd, and the illusion that one survival win had made the Hornets playoff proof. Official note, with Charlotte's death, the league's living population falls to 17. Briefly. Thanks for watching.